May God open our eyes to see, our ears to hear, and our hearts to love. Amen. From the edges to the heartlands, Lent involves some difficult travel, traversing challenging places in our understanding of the sacred and the self, facing questions we would rather not address, listening to some dark music. We seek a blessing, such as Abraham sought after following the call to leave behind his kin and his land, to go to a place where God did not reside. In ancient religion, gods were linked to a particular place and to the people of that place. But Yahweh was calling Abram and Sarai to an unknown place. And so the story expresses a new movement in human theology, a dawning understanding that God, that the sacred, was not limited by geography. It was to be more than a millennium before a descendant of Sarai and Abraham from the nowhere town of Nazareth would claim that neither was God linked to a particular race or nation. In 2016, near the end of his life, Leonard Cohen released the song that we heard, You Want It Darker. He wrestles with the idea of God, just as his Jewish forebears did before him. In the face of human violence and suffering, he questions the nature of God. God the good and powerful, God the absent and indifferent, or God the callous and the cruel. The nature of the holy haunts his final reflection. If God is good and powerful as we are told, why does suffering persist? Cohen doesn't question God's power. He rages against God's unwillingness to address suffering. Like the psalmist, he challenges God to be God. Cohen did not go gently into that good night. There is no making peace with God here. In the gospel reading, Peter is disturbed by Jesus' acceptance of suffering and death. In the verses prior to today's reading, Jesus asks his disciples who they think that he is, and Peter answers, the Messiah, a title meaning someone appointed by God for a specific purpose, a title that points to Jesus' power and authority. But then Jesus tells his disciples that the chosen one must undergo great suffering and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. The juxtaposition of the power that Peter had experienced in Jesus' healing and his ministry, and this prediction of suffering was too much for Peter. He rebukes Jesus, and Jesus in turn rebukes him. Peter's difficulties are not unlike our own or unlike Cohen's. In the song, Leonard Cohen says, "A million candles burning for the help that never came. A million candles burning for the love that never came." Cohen fumes that millions are asking, praying for help, but God does not answer. God is supposed to help humans, but there is no help. So Cohen imputes ill will to God. He ponders if it might be God's will that humans hurt and harm, and that the evil acts of humanity are in fact humans doing God's will. You, he says, addressing God, want it darker. We kill the flame. The antithesis of a merciful and loving God. In the bald and appalling statement, you want it darker, we kill the flame, Cohen is rejecting theologies that attribute the state of the world to God. If God is in control, as conservative people of many faiths claim, then God is a bastard, and Cohen has had enough of that God. If you are the dealer, I'm out of the game. If you are the healer, it means I'm broken and lame. If thine be the glory, then mine must be the shame. He's saying that I've had enough of an image of God that makes me a peon in a horrifying game. I've had enough of being a toy for the God who lets people suffer, while rabbis and priests sing glory to God and assign all the shame to suffering people. He recognizes that religion has been used as a lullaby for suffering, or as Mark said, an opiate for the people. In its constant reference to human sinfulness for which God requires payment, religion has been used to disempower and to keep poor people, ordinary people, submissive to priestly power. Cohen also names political abuses and military collusion. Killing by the powerful is often given theological justification. But Cohen will not be subservient. He is prepared to stand before this God. Hineni, Hineni, I'm ready, my Lord. Hineni, used many times in the Hebrew Bible, literally means behold, but it is often understood to mean here I am, as in here I am, Lord. This is not the compliant here I am, Lord of the familiar hymn. This is not Cohen on his knees seeking a call. Cohen is defiant. Behold, here I stand, I'm ready to go. But not because I'm trusting in your will, God. I'm ready to go because I will not comply with the order of suffering and violence that seems to be your will. I want out of the game. It was never my game. He weaves Jewish and Christian images and liturgies into the song. Magnified, sanctified be your holy name, a direct translation of the first 4 words of the mourner's Kaddish, a Jewish prayer said by close relatives of a deceased person after burial. Vilified, crucified in the human frame is certainly a reference to Jesus. Flowing between the traditions, he takes from each what fits his litany of suffering as he addresses God. Cohen's struggle, I think, resonates with that of Peter, though we know much less about what Peter was thinking. Both are asking, how do we reconcile suffering with the divine? Yet Jesus offers something new, an understanding that I think that Cohen probably believed that we have yet to integrate into our worldview. Jesus knows that if his ministry is to continue in accordance with God's will, it will inevitably bring him into deadly conflict with religious and political authorities. He sees it as unavoidable. The activist Jesuit priest Daniel Berrigan once said that if you want to follow Jesus, you had better look good on wood. I appreciate Cohen's tough theological questions, exploring the nature of the holy and our relationship to it. In response to Cohen, though, I want to say what God is not for me. God for me is not a person-like being who is in control of the events of the universe, who can be placated by our prayers and petitions or influenced by our behaviour. Neither is God a player manipulating us for good or evil. For me, God consciousness is opening, seeking, and experiencing the holy, the divine power that is at the heart of the universe. God flows through all that is and is present in all that is life-giving. Everything we say about God is a metaphor, so please bear that in mind as you hear what I am trying to say about the sacred. We cannot pin it down, and yet the spiritual life enables us to experience divine presence, to know very profoundly the truth that is love and goodness and beauty, to sense that there is a path that we can choose which enhances life, and there is another one that we can also choose, which leads to the annihilation of life. And I seek, and we seek, to order our lives around the story of Jesus of Nazareth, the one who most profoundly showed us what God is like and what it is to live in harmony with the divine. So as part of that, I reject the doctrine of atonement in its classic form, which tells of a God who looked down and saw a wicked world that must be punished for its sins, and so sent his son Jesus to earth to pay the price for the sinfulness of the world. I reject the picture of a God who desires violence. I believe that Jesus was pointing us to a God who relates to us in two primary ways. Firstly, God, the divine power, is love. And when we open ourselves to this power, we know too that we are loved and accepted and embraced. And secondly, and perhaps this is where I most differ from Cohen, I believe that this God allows us freedom. God does not intervene in every detail of our lives because God knows the creation needed freedom. In a way, it is as if God, who desires to be in relation with creation, knows that the relationship cannot be true relation if we do not have freedom. And so we say that Jesus, the Christ, is the incarnation of love and freedom. And in Christa community, that which has carried on since the life of the earthly Jesus of Nazareth, we may also know the incarnation of love and freedom. For love and freedom are the core of human life. And when I address God in prayer and song, I am not speaking to God as some kind of super person. Rather, I am opening myself to the God who is within me, the God who is among us, and the God who is beyond us. Somehow, the creation of which we are part is infused with this God power. I cannot prove this. I can only believe it and try to live as if I believe it, for that is what it means to have faith. Dorothy Macrae-McMahon, in her book Everyday Passions, wrote about 3 options for worldviews available to us. First, she says, we can decide that at the centre of everything there is evil. This view carries little hope and it violates our view of ourselves and those we know. Some of the time we experience the world as Cohen does in that song. Or secondly, she says, we can decide that there is nothing or chaos at the centre of everything, or that if there were somebody or something, that thing or one is now gone. And she says there are 2 ways that people respond to that perception. Some try to live their lives without seeing pattern or meaning in it. But those people can have a very high sense of responsibility, a calling somehow in their own understanding to live justly and creatively. However, they see human beings as being alone in this endeavour. They live to please no God, but to live with integrity. For Christians, these are our secular partners. But there are others in this category who live only for themselves because they see no larger picture and no purpose in doing anything else. And then the third worldview response that Dorothy identifies, she says, we can decide to believe that in spite of the random justice and injustice of life, at the centre of everything lies love and good. And we may call that energy or being different names. People who choose this option face life deciding how to connect with and interpret the activity of this power, whom some will call God. And there are people of many faiths who hold to this understanding. This is what the earliest disciples called the way. And it is from this perspective that I seek to speak of God and of human suffering and injustice. Peter wanted Jesus to be God's beloved child, the chosen one, but didn't want the freedom that is also part of the essence of human life. So I don't believe that illness, death, suffering, or injustice are sent by God. I don't believe that there is a God who selects people to test them with injustices to see how strong they are. I don't believe that God gives some parents a severely disabled child because they are, in God's opinion, able to handle that. That God is less loving than most of us. That God is playing with people's lives. What is different from this view and the view of the universe that sees nothing or chaos at the heart of the universe is that along with suffering, sorrow, and trouble, there is also God, being, power, which is God, which is love, and in which we can trust. We know that when we experience a sense of that caring, a connection with us in our grieving, our weakness, our fear, and our pain. I cannot prove the existence of this caring God. It is an act of faith to believe it and to live as if we believe it. Jesus believed in the promise of God to those who live faithfully, to those who, like Abraham and Sarah, trust God. But he wasn't just thinking about that for himself. For what is true of the chosen one is true for all humans. Saving one's life at the expense of God's good news will be the loss of one's soul, one's true self, one's very life. Believing God's promise means acting with the courage of hope. Sometimes we can do that with full confidence. Sometimes, like Sarah, in laughing wonder. Sometimes with fear and trepidation. And sometimes we find it hard to hope. And we, like Cohen, rage against all that is broken in the universe. We don't have to understand everything. Our metaphors don't have to be perfect. But trusting God's promise involves giving one's heart to hope. Believing means having enough confidence in this reality to act on it, incredible though it may seem. Amen.